Hello, everyone. I am Michael Steelman, Director of Alumni Career Development and Professional Engagement for William Mary. It is my pleasure to welcome you to day two of William Mary's sixth annual Professional Development Week. William & Mary is your career partner for life. The university has committed to lead in the preparation of lifelong learners, equipped to navigate rapid change and thrive from their first job to their last. This week of programming designed for the entire William & Mary community will cover a variety of topics relevant to people at all points of their career journey. When designing the sessions, we focused on the NACE career competencies, which are career and self-development, communication, equity and inclusion, leadership, professionalism, teamwork, and technology. We are truly grateful for the continued engagement of our William & Mary community to support one another's professional success. I want to acknowledge and thank all the William & Mary volunteers and colleagues who expressed their willingness to help on One Network, have taken the time to prepare remarks, advised us on topics, and are serving as networking event hosts throughout the country. Without your guidance, support, and expertise, this week would not be possible. I'm joined today by my colleagues and co-planners, Kelly O'Shaughnessy and Alex Beard, who you'll hear more from later in the session. Before I turn things over to our panel today, I just have a few technology items to cover. Today's session is being recorded, and we will notify all registrants once the recording is available. Also, questions are welcome, and we ask that you use the Q&A button in the Zoom menu to submit your questions. JD will monitor the Q&A, and as time allows, we'll address the questions. It is now my great pleasure to introduce our incredible panel this afternoon to discuss modern leadership strategies for inspirational team management. First, we have class of 2005 alumna, Jenay Barbee. Jenay is a workforce development professional with nearly 20 years of training and leadership development experience in the public and nonprofit sectors. In her current role, Jenay manages the credentialing program for the Department of Defense Human Resources Civilian Workforce. Next, we have class of 2016, Brian Jenkins. Brian is a social entrepreneur and community builder. He leads the nation's largest military arts organization, the Armed Services Arts Partnership, also known as ASAP. Brian was recently named to the Forbes 30 Under 30 list for 2024. Lastly, to help facilitate today's discussion, we are fortunate to have J.D. Dew, Executive Director of the Center for a Military Transition at William & Mary's Raymond A. Mason School of Business. JD leads the efforts to develop and empower veterans to think and lead like executives. Prior to serving at William & Mary, JD spent several years as the Director of Programs and Scholarships at the Pat Tillman Foundation, where he ran the selection process and developed a leadership development program for remarkable active duty service members, military veterans, and military spouses. No matter where you are in your career today, we hope that this conversation will encourage you to think about ways you can recognize and capitalize on your personal strengths, as well as the strengths of your team to achieve organizational goals. Without further ado, it's my pleasure to turn things over to my colleague, J.D. Dew.
Michael, thank you so very much for that warm, kind, and welcoming introduction. And it's absolutely just wonderful to see everybody here today. Literally just looking at the chat, we are spanning this continent. And that is a very, I think, special thing. When you look at this tribe of leaders, not just that who was on the panel, but this tribe of leaders that's a part of this entire event, that's taking the opportunity during the course of your own meaningful and impactful lives and careers to listen, but more importantly, to learn about this thing called leadership. And before we get started, I'd actually like to offer just a brief comment about what a wonderful program that my fellow panelists really have for you and what we're here to talk about. Just look at that title, Modern Leadership, and how that fits into this program and how it fits into this really remarkable week. I had a chance yesterday just to tune in a little bit, and whether it was Oz Parvez from Capital One, who spoke about not just career development, but purposeful, intentional career development, and how one can own their own story, how one can keep an open mind while still fostering really deep and meaningful relationships. And I love the fact that he said you can be a nice guy and not finish last. Those are, I think, just wonderful insights. And then after that, you have like the indefatigable Kelly Crace. And Dr. Crace with his wise reminders of the steps that we need to take words that we actually need to tell ourselves to ensure that we can truly flourish in our lives, professionally, personally, comprehensively, and then still operate at our most productive, our most fulfilled, and simultaneously at our most resilient. And today, there's more. There's more. Because all these discussions, because even as you integrate them into the on-site and the online networking events that this team is organized, they're all intentionally designed to really continue and directly contribute to meaningful conversations, conversations that matter among a tribe that seeks to find impact and purpose and fulfillment. And man, just simply put, those are the ingredients of a really, really awesome and exciting week. So with that, let's turn to our topic of discussion for today, because as I mentioned earlier, it's not just about leadership. Today, we're actually focused on modern leadership. We're focused on steps, tools, thinking that you can apply to inspirational leadership. And I firmly believe that if we ask the right questions, and luckily that's my job, just to ask questions, right? But if we ask the right questions about this critical topic, if we are curious, if we are inclusive of thoughts and experiences and perspectives, then that act of asking questions about leadership is really an opportunity to inquire what it means to be a leader, what it means to be human, and then more importantly, what does it mean to be a human leader in the face of what sometimes can seem to be an absolutely absurd world. So let's get started. Again, we have an extraordinary opportunity to hear from our two inspirational leaders who in their own right are making an impact and making a difference. And Jenay, Brian, I think if y'all are ready, we can probably just sort of jump right into this.
Let's do it.
All right, let's do it. Jenay, if you don't mind, we'll start with you. And if you could tell us a little bit about yourself. So how does someone get from William and Mary to the Pentagon?
Great question, JD, and just want to say thank you so much for an opportunity to come and participate on the panel for today. I can answer that in just a very short word, and that's just service. What initially drew me to the College of William and Mary was their commitment to service. I actually learned more about the campus and was invited to visit as a part of a high school recognition award. It was the William and Mary Leadership Award. And so it was my first opportunity to see the campus, fall in love with it, and really determine that this was a place where I could see myself during my undergraduate years. I come from a family of service members. My grandfather was an airman. My father is a retired Marine, and I am also a military spouse. And so, you know, service to our country and also service to our community really does run deep. And so when I think about initially after finishing my time at William and Mary, I was immediately drawn to the nonprofit sector. I'm a very mission-driven individual, and so I had just a wonderful experience pouring into the lives of individuals in the Richmond community, doing capacity building work, and just really looking at ways that I could continue to give. And so I also grew up in Northern Virginia, and so being right outside of our nation's capital, spending time as a military brat on Quantico Marine Corps base, there really wasn't a way to escape, you know, the quote unquote Pentagon. And so I found myself after making that transition with my husband back to Northern Virginia that I wanted to serve as a part of the federal sector. And so that's what led me to serve with the DoD. And I've been back with the DoD for about 3 years now, and initially started my role in 2016 after leaving the nonprofit sector.
No, awesome. Thank you. Thank you for that. And Brian, to you, a similar question. How does, again, someone get from William and Mary to a leading national arts-focused veteran-serving nonprofit? That doesn't necessarily show up at our career fairs all the time, although the Pentagon is there. But how, again, tell us that story.
Yeah, fair enough. There's not a lot of these. It's a pretty niche space. So the first thing to me is the mission of my career is community building. So I grew up in a tight-knit faith community where I learned how powerful it is to belong in a supportive environment with people who know what's going on in one another's lives, sometimes too much about what's going on in one another's lives. But having that experience of if someone's diagnosed with cancer or some other challenge happens, there's immediately a huge spreadsheet somewhere with casseroles lined up for the next 60 days. So I learned that growing up in a faith community, and then continued to experience how important and powerful tight-knit communities are while on campus at William and Mary. And I actually studied religious studies undergrad. But after, and actually while I was on campus at William and Mary, started working with people living through poverty and homelessness to create a supportive community where those folks might be able to access the tools and services that are available to them locally. I worked with asylum seekers in Southeast Asia to build a supportive network of organizations that were willing to provide emergency assistance and support to them. And then formerly incarcerated folks who were working to become entrepreneurs. I worked to create an online community where business coaches and attorneys and other accountants, other professionals would be willing to share their skills, and those formerly incarcerated entrepreneurs would be able to share their talents with one another and kind of crowdsource ideas and support. Because sometimes it's easier to become an entrepreneur after dealing with incarceration than it is to actually get a job. And then I knew about ASAP because we were actually founded on campus at William and Mary. Our founder, Sam Pressler, went to school a few years before I did at William and Mary. And so I heard great things about the organization, had a lot of respect for the work that ASAP has been doing, which is fostering creative communities where veterans and their families thrive through the arts. What that means is storytelling, comedy, creative writing, all kinds of art forms where folks are digging deep and working through the arts to better understand their own personal stories, express themselves creatively, and share that in a community and with an audience. So I actually applied to become program director of ASAP. They rejected me. They went with another candidate. A couple months later, the founder announced he was stepping down, and he thought I might be a better fit for his job, is what he said. So I applied, I moved to DC, and one way to get to leading a national nonprofit, JD, is to start with a smaller one and then get it there. So that's part of the journey for me. But in short, it's always been about community building.
No, that's great. And I think it's interesting looking at both of those responses, whether, Jenay, your emphasis on service, Brian, your emphasis on belonging and community building. I imagine that probably radiates to the people that are actually on your teams. And when you look at working with teams, even those that might have like a super intense and high degree of passion and commitment to those values, from time to time, even the most committed will need inspiration and guidance and perhaps this idea of modern leadership. My next question, and again, we'll start with you again, Jenay. How do you go about helping a team become better?
Great question. I think it starts with knowing your people. As a leader, you have the obligation to really understand your team, understand what motivates them, and be able to adjust your leadership style to those dynamics. When we think about motivation, it can be something that's intrinsic, it can be something that's external. And so really thinking about ways that you can connect with them in order to motivate them and move towards the mission or the goal of that particular team. I think it's also important to establish a culture of trust, being able to know that as a leader, they can trust that you are going to lead in the best interest of not only the organization, but the team itself. And also authenticity, being able to really think through how you show up as a leader and how that trickles down to your team will also help to provide that for them.
No, great points. Brian, your thoughts?
Yeah, Jenay said the root of it, and the way I think about effective leadership is that so much of it is just about being good at relationships, right? So relationships take sincere effort, and when you're in a relationship, whether it's a friendship or a significant other or a colleague, people need to know that you care about them on a personal level. That's the root of it to me, is being curious and aware of what's going on in your colleagues' lives, which, by the way, is also helpful to know and how it might impact their work. Relationships benefit from alignment on shared expectations, whether that's a partner, a friend, or a colleague. In the workplace, we have the privilege of being so much more explicit about it and being able to write it down and have that be a norm and communicate so clearly about these things. So having shared expectations is so important in relationships. Jenay mentioned motivations. I completely agree on that. Being observant is a piece of this in relationships. And then another element that I would flag is your own self-awareness, right? So what are you bringing into the meetings that you're stepping into? What's the posture that you're sharing? What's the attitude that you're sharing? For example, in a crisis, calm breeds calm. If you are bringing your own anxious attitude or your own anger or whatever attitude or context you're bringing into the meeting with your team, that's setting a tone as the leader. And again, that kind of comes back to relationships. Your partner needs to know if you had a rough day. So do your colleagues. So much of that is about relationship.
Now, again, I love this aspect of being other-centric, right? Even in forming those relationships, making sure, again, you have that feedback that relationships can provide to help you be and hit that element of self-awareness that Jenay mentioned too. I actually have a follow-up question on this, and this follow-up question is actually to the audience. And I'm curious if the audience could actually use the chat to talk about potentially like some specific tools, either a specific skill or a tool or a technique you might have used as a supervisor that, again, have contributed to this sort of professional relationship, this authentic professional relationship building that Jenay and Brian just shared. And as y'all are thinking about that and starting to input it in, I'm going to ask actually that same follow-up question to Brian and then Jenay. Yeah, what specific skills or tools have you used to sort of achieve those effects, again, of deep, meaningful connection at work?
Yeah, I definitely think the power of questions is so helpful. When I think about it from a practical sense, as a supervisor, you are having an opportunity to speak with the members of your team. You're having those one-on-one conversations. But I really find that there are opportunities, not only in just the connections that you're having one-on-one, but in the pause. How often have you met with a direct report and they've come to you with a challenge and you're listening and it's very valid. You could solve it for them. But instead, I'm going to ask you some questions about that scenario, particularly. What are some different angles that you may or may not have considered? And just sit in the silence. A lot of coaches use that technique to really ensure that you are really pulling from what you're thinking about in order to know and recognize that the answer does lie within. And of course, there might be some follow-up needed and some coaching to help to round out whatever that solution might be. But definitely having that consistent conversation one-on-one that builds connection, but also had opportunity to pause, allow them to think through solutions is also a way to help them as well develop and grow.
No, that's great. And some of the answers that are coming in on chat right now, be curious, not judgmental, which I think is a Ted Lasso quote, by the way. Empathy, active listening. My grandmother actually paraphrased a Stoic philosopher that said you should employ your ears and your mouth in the same ratio they exist on your head. Wonderful things. Somebody mentioned that they have a weekly question of a week. That's how they start their weekly sort of startup pieces too. Brian, to you, some of the techniques and skills that you use on your team or your organization uses broadly.
There's so many thoughts so many directions to go, and so much of it is already in the chat. One I'll share that I think is particularly fun. So our team, we have a weekly staff meeting like any other team. And the way we start every single week is by sharing shout outs, right? So if somebody on the team or in our broader community has done something above and beyond, that's the opportunity to publicly praise them. And it creates a feeling of momentum, achievement, and mutual support on the team that is just such a valuable and positive way to start our week. So that's one tool that is so easy and basic. I want to point out also Andrew Flaxman saying admitting mistakes. again, back to the relationships thing, like being good at apologizing is a way to be a good human. And it's also so undervalued in our leadership, right? So being able to quickly acknowledge when you make mistakes, because we all do, regardless of what level of leadership you are, it builds so much more trust with your team to be able to acknowledge those things quickly, authentically, and clearly.
Absolutely. And I think it's also interesting to then be mindful to external context of things that are out of your control, to even use a medium such as this to be intentional and then practice about making a meaningful connection. I mean, we've all had horrible experiences on Zoom, right? But again, we've all had horrible or less than ideal experiences, as well as extraordinary experiences in person in a variety of those components too. So I think those are all key aspects. I noticed one of the other themes that sort of came up here quite a bit was just this notion of communication. And Brian, I'm going to ask you to sort of take the lead on this next question. And when we think about inspiring others and team motivation, when we think about relationships and connection, breaking it down to some specific finite skills, how does one develop communication skills in other team members to, again, achieve collective goals and growth?
I love this question. So one piece of this is having a set of shared language and shared tools on your team. One example that I think is really valuable and important in our team is having a writing first culture. And what I mean by that is that it can sometimes be a little easier to jump into the meeting and just have the conversation and free flow and see what people have to contribute and talk out a problem. But I have found it to be so much more effective to rely heavily, not just on agendas, but memos, right? Where if you have your team that has someone has a decision to make, writing it out is just so different than verbal communication. It requires you to be so much more cogent and clear in what your reasoning is. So that's something that I found to be incredibly, incredibly helpful. Even if you're going to have a meeting about it, there should be a clear written form of the decision that you're making if it's an important and valuable decision. So that's one thing, is a writing first culture. Another example of a set of tools here and shared language. One that I use on my team is, and it ends up coming out in different versions, is I intend to blank, instead of saying, should I do A or B? Right. So there are decisions that all of us have to make all across our organizations. And leaders in particular are a lot more vulnerable to decision fatigue. I know that I feel it every single day. There's only so much headspace I have to negotiate between options A, B, C, D, E. And if you push authority outwards to your team and help people understand that what is on their plate is their responsibility, that they have the authority, responsibility, ownership over those things. The way that we operate on my team is I never want to have someone on my team come to me and say, Brian, should I do A or B? The shared language that we've arrived at, if a decision has reached their desk, someone comes to me and says, hey, Brian, here's the decision point that I've arrived at. There's option A and there's option B. I intend to option B because this. And then I can say, great job, I agree. Or I can ask some clarifying questions. But that I intend to phrase has now, is distributed across the team and is happening in lots of other meetings where I'm not present as well. And it saves all of us time on decision fatigue.
No, that's great. I think it's also that language and the framework is actually an invitation to autonomy without, creating anarchy, right?
Yes.
And again, you can keep an open mind, but not so open that your brains fall. And again, the aspect of that language, I think, is actually deeply, deeply compelling. And it has a lot of persuasive power that's there too. Jenay, your thoughts, right? Because again, you're an organization that it's one of the biggest, in this portion of the solar system, right? Just in terms of people that are part of the Department of Defense. What are your thoughts on this idea of developing communication skills?
Yes, I definitely like the language that you use around invitation to autonomy. And I think I can just take a little bit of a different slant as it relates to communication and common language. Using assessment tools has been something that we've relied upon. Specifically, I can think about the DISC framework in my role with the Marine Corps. That's a lot of the common language that we use as it relates to communicating and relating to one another. So as a part of our onboarding, an individual who is new to an organization would be required to take a behavioral assessment, essentially. But I just cannot overestimate how effective it is once you learn the framework of whether someone is a dominant behavior or a conscientious person, how you change your approach. And it really does help with eliminating some of the friction and initial maybe misconceptions you might have about someone because you understand how their preference leans. But it's also not a way out, because even though I might have a very outgoing or engaging personality, I need to be able to flex my communication style in order to relate better to others. And so that's been something that's been very effective where we are.
No, thank you. Thank you both for that. Actually, Greg just had a comment in the chat, offering a devil's advocate perspective. And I think in the spirit of communication and discourse, I think we should actually introduce that in right now, because he talks about some of these points run counter, as his words, the opposite of how previous generations approached leadership. So how do you share leadership with folks that operate via some of the old school chain of command, hierarchical, seniority, authority-based approaches? At the same point in time, that personal relationships can be painful and can sometimes backfire. Y'all's thoughts on that? I think that's actually it's a profound contribution to this conversation.
If I could jump in there, part of what informs my perspective on this is that I started this job when I was 24, which I joke about. It blows me away that the board of directors trusted me with this job. So, until recently, I've always been the youngest person on my staff, right? And so, Greg, I certainly appreciate where you're coming from there. I think one piece that I always keep in mind is personal boundaries, right? So the curiosity and asking questions and those kinds of things are critically important to me and my team. But if someone doesn't want to share something with me, that's their prerogative, right? I'm not demanding to know more than someone wants to share. And if somebody, back to the relationships piece, the way that I would respond to Greg here is, and Jenay has mentioned this, what does that individual want from you as your supervisor, as your manager? If somebody really just wants super explicit expectations, direct communication, these are the deliverables, these are the outcomes, then you can deliver that as a manager. And that's great. That can be the end all be all, and that can be the way that your relationship operates. Particularly in my work, and actually Jenay's too, the military community does actually have a little bit more of that old school culture than other industries. So certainly hear where you're coming from.
Yeah. Jenay, any your thoughts and reactions?
Yes, I just wanted to add, I think that it's also important to just have a understanding of each of the generations within our workplace, and how they tend to prefer to communicate, and some of those characteristics or traits that really shape who they are. I'm actually reading a book right now that talks about the differences between all 5 generations in the workplace and the importance of really meeting those individuals where they are. And so I think about the comment that was mentioned earlier around shared values, figuring out what those are and finding common ground in order to forge a working relationship that can be productive.
No, that's great. And actually, Jenay, just coming right off of that, listening to you describe that, right? Shared values, this other-centricness, what you mentioned earlier about authenticity. I think those are actually really powerful building blocks of belonging, right? Which was Brian's initial sort of value that he talked about. And so beyond what we've already discussed, what are some of the best examples of leaders you've seen, or potentially things you've done as exceptional leaders in your own right to foster belonging?
I would definitely say the power of connection. I get so much joy out of introducing individuals who don't know each other, but
Hmm.
have a similar connection or value. I think that it's really helpful to leverage mentoring relationships to help bring belonging, particularly in an organization that is hybrid. You have Gen Z, for instance, entering the workforce now and really looking at ways that they can have connection in the workforce. And so for me, working primarily remotely, it is so important that we're fostering belonging through those individual relationships and connections through mentoring, which allow individuals to have that space to feel like they are a part of a community.
No, that's great. Brian, your thoughts?
Yeah, just one example I'd share. Close friend and mentor of mine recently started a new executive role where he has 450 people on his team spread across all 6 continents, and I think 12 offices. And he, in his first 6 months on the job, flew to every single office, met every single team member, and learned every single person's name. And we had dinner, I think 8 months after he started the job, and he was like, "Yep, like I know every single person's name on my team." And the effort there, like this man is brilliant and has such big problems to solve, huge resources at his disposal, and his priority in that first 6 months was making sure that each person on his team has shaken his hand, seen his face, had a conversation, and that he knows their name, which to me was a powerful example of belonging and leadership.
No, that's great. And both of y'all actually mentioned mentors. And one of the things that struck with me, one of my mentors that I had in the Army, who was a distinguished senior leader and a strategic thinker in his own right, he actually helped foster a relationship to help me think up and out too. You know, we've been talking a lot about just the power, that obvious power of authentic connections as we look down and inside an organization. But external conditions, if it's seasonality of a market, all the different sort of human elements that are there, these also affect meaning of our work. And I think because of this, before a leader can actually act, he or she or they must first understand and then visualize a situation to sort of collaboratively effective and lead to, again, to be able to empower people with autonomy, to invite them to that writing centric culture. I'm curious, when you think about the external context of your work, what techniques or tools do you employ as a leader to ensure that you really do understand that situation comprehensively and are able to address the complexities of context and all these situational variables? Brian, and again, that could be any facet of
Yeah.
what that does, right?
Yeah, I mean, I think there's, like all these questions, right? There's a ton of angles to go at them from. One immediate angle that I think is super important here is getting the right expertise in the room, and that's an obvious, straightforward piece here. But we are all one person, and as a single person, there's no way that you have all of the data that you need to make an informed decision, and it's really important to lean on the expertise, not just of your team, but your partners and other people who might be able to help inform that decision. I also think an important piece of this is sometimes being the last person to speak and give a point of view, right? So as far as understanding the context and conditions, get every person around the table to share their unvarnished opinion as much as you possibly can, and then share your input, because whatever you share is going to have an anchor effect that changes the conversation in the room.
Yeah, great points. Jenay, your thoughts?
Definitely agree. I think there's also extreme value in having multiple feedback channels. In working with the Marine Corps at the headquarters level, a lot of times we were sharing policy that needed to be implemented at the installation level. And, you know, we don't always have a pulse on what's going on locally. And so having a way to meet at the local commands and hear what's going on and get feedback, to go and visit and observe and see what's happening, is definitely a way for us to understand ways that we can better support and serve. And then then also thinking about it through the lens of anonymous feedback, creating safe spaces for people to give feedback so that they don't fear retribution as a part of it is definitely a helpful approach. So having kind of that all around perspective, getting insight externally is so helpful and informative for leaders.
No, all great points. So thus far, we've talked about a number of different components of inspirational leadership, right? We've talked about seeing individuals, right? Adjusting specific interactions to deepen relationships, to maximize motivation, performance, cohesion, looking at different strengths and tools, assessments that people can use. We've talked about communication, context, critical thinking. Jenay, we'll start with you. If you were to sum all of this up, and I'm actually really interested to hear your thoughts on really what's a sort of a first order question. If you sum all of this up, how would you define what modern leadership means to you? What is it?
When I think about modern leadership, it's situational. I think as you're looking at the audiences that you're working with and your teams, there are different tools in your tool belt that you'll need to pull out at various times. So if someone is maybe younger in their career, you will need to rely upon more of a directive style to really get them in the direction that they need to go. Whereas if someone is more seasoned, that's going to be an opportunity to do some coaching and making sure that they're able to go and move forward with whatever is being decided. And so really modern leadership for me is adjusting to the situation and being able to keep those tenets of trust, humility, authenticity, all while making sure that you're being there. I know also a part of it is servant leadership as well. So putting the well-being of your team first before the organization and some of the challenges that may be impacted as a part of your decisions that you're making. So really looking at ways that you can support your team and also empower them as well is what I think of as it relates to modern leadership.
No, thank you for that. Brian, your thoughts?
So I thought it was really fun to reflect on this question a little bit. So here's my thought. I think that modern leadership in the context of the American economy today, there has been more value creation and innovation and productivity in the United States of America, the modern US, than any other civilization in the history of humanity. And I think that it is in large part because we are able to leverage a greater variety, diversity of talent in a pluralistic and expressive society than any other society that's ever existed, right? So to me, I think modern leadership is maximizing the contribution of a talent pool in a psychologically safe and authentic way that has more points of view than any other in history.
I like it.
Yeah.
I mean, in so many ways, we look at these notions of understanding context, right? Diversity of thought, the meeting people where they are, using all those specific skills that are there. And then there's this X factor, right? Brian, you articulated far more beautifully than I do. And that X factor, though, I think it goes by many names and it's many tools, but it's that human personal element, right? Humanity is not solely explained by math. That is a perspective, but it's one of many that's there. And it's those connections, those meaningful connections, again, that I would humbly posit to you, that's that X factor that we're looking at here. Now, Jenay, Brian, if you're up to it, I think it could be a good time to shift focus just a bit and open things up to questions from the audience. Does that work for you? I think, Jenay, one of the questions I saw in the chat was actually somebody was curious about the book that you're reading, the title of that book, about the convergence of the 5 different generations within the workforce, which again is a historically unique component within our workforce today as well. So that's an early first question, but if y'all are open to it, I think we can shift to audience questions. Does that work?
Absolutely.
Cool. I think the first one, it looks like it's coming in from Tiffany. She thanks the two of y'all for contributing to this panel, and she also leads a program at the intersection of the military, the arts, and community in a college focused on developing leaders. She asked both if you could talk about the role of creativity in leadership and how do you engage those who might be skeptical of their own capacity to be creative. That's great.
Tiffany, I'm very curious
Yeah.
about the work that you do, and given its overlap with what we do at ASAP. The second question is what I'm thinking about most right now. How you engage those who might be skeptical in their own capacity to be creative. So I think that back to Jenay and I have both talked a lot about curiosity and questions. And I think I'm going to circle back to that first, in that curiosity and asking questions are so helpful in just knocking things loose in our brains. And I'll add to that creative exercises, right? So ASAP, what we do at ASAP is we teach art, right? We teach storytelling, comedy, improv, lots of different art tools for art. And if you are on this call, we have 75 people on this call. If you were to think right now, if you had to get up on stage and tell a 7-minute real life, really entertaining story tomorrow, there's some people on this call who are going to instantly have an idea. And then there are a lot of people on this call who might be like, I don't know what story I have that's good enough to tell to get up on stage and share. But if we change that to give you some tools to start thinking about these ideas, I'll give you a couple of them. So one is write down all of the lies that you've ever told in your life. I guarantee you'll instantly start to have tons of stories that are interesting to share, right? All the lies that you've ever told before. We've all told lies. Write down every place that you've ever been. Write down all of the people that you know in your life, starting from when you were born to today. And it could be mom, dad, grandma, and then going further along, the guy that I passed on the street who like dropped his falafel yesterday. Like when you create a container, that's actually where creativity thrives, is creating containers for people to think and open their minds.
Jenay, your thoughts on that question?
I love that response, Brian. As you were mentioning those containers that are created, I think also creativity can come through storytelling, an opportunity to invite folks to share ways that there's an intersection between their experiences and what's being applied in the workplace can be an opportunity for them to exhibit some creativity. And so that definitely relates to kind of that brainstorming that you mentioned.
Yeah, I agree. I think also doing that in a context that's safe, that's warm, that's welcoming, that fosters belonging. I think that's another piece to get against some of that skepticism that's there too. I know in the work that we do here with our student veteran community and transitioning service members, this notion of imposter syndrome or the imposter phenomenon, I actually think is a combination of what happens when you have people that are curious and you're encouraging them to be humble, right?
Yeah.
It is that aspect of things. So one of the words that I've made up, and candidly, let's be honest, all words are made up, right? But I like this notion of humbition, right? Of humility plus ambition, right? To at least be able to put that to help somebody think through in a new container of creativity, how to get past some of that aspect of skepticism. I think that's really, really sort of key. Another comment that's here that they mentioned AI existing as a fancy buzzword, right? And yet you might have people or team members that are scared about the growth of AI. Their question is actually looking at how can you motivate a team to embrace AI and potentially even any form of new technology in motivating them to be an early adopter on that. Jenay, perhaps we'll start this one with you. Just to
Absolutely.
what your
That
thoughts and
is
reactions are.
A great question. I am dealing with that right now in my current role. And I think a part of it is a little bit of education. Of course, there are a lot of training opportunities that we have in our organization on different platforms within our LMS that talk about AI and how to use it in the workplace, and really reframing an individual and how they might think about it, particularly through the lens of HR, because one of the things that folks can maybe initially have as a thought is that it's something that could potentially replace their role in the future. But to reframe it instead as a productivity tool. And when you're able to show opportunities where they can utilize AI to solve a problem or maybe help brainstorm a challenge that you're facing, just to give some additional insight, I see the light bulb come on. With my own supervisor, there was a challenge that was mentioned by our director, and she said, I absolutely don't know where to start. And so I immediately went to Gen AI, put in a couple of prompts, and what I generated for her, she was just like, wow, this is really helpful. And so in those moments where it's just in time application, you begin to see individuals who are slow to use AI begin to be open to using it a little bit more.
No, fascinating. Fascinating. Brian, your thoughts, reactions?
A slightly different way, I'd say, a point that I think Jenay already shared. I'm a big fan of the Pivot podcast. If folks are curious, you should check it out with Kara Swisher and Scott Galloway. One way that they talk about this is they say that artificial intelligence isn't going to take your job. Someone who understands how to use artificial intelligence is going to take your job. So all of us are comfortable or not comfortable with change to a certain extent. I think that, like lots of innovation, this is an opportunity to learn and grow and leverage those tools and not be scared of them, because they can make us better at the jobs that we currently have. And it's also going to open up all kinds of new opportunities.
Yeah.
For sure.
No, I mean, in both of those, actually, our next question, I think, is feeding right off of those those reactions, your reactions to this conversation. And if you look at this anonymous attendee, they're talking about with additional sort of work at home, hybrid jobs, this boundary between work and home life has been blurred. And particularly if you have people that are deeply motivated, if you are engendering inspirational leadership, those lines can be blurred even more. For each of y'all, we'll start with you, Brian, and then go to Jenay. How do you inspire people to give their best work, but also teach them to sort of prioritize their boundaries and their well-being, making sure that they give their best effort, but then they don't feel that they need to sacrifice more than what's appropriate in order to do well?
So I'll preface my thought by sharing that I know some organizations this might be different right? Like if an organization is in person, or if an organization does have certain requirements around working hours, the answer might be different. I'll just share what we do on my team. So we're a remote team, but we have in-person programs and events. For our team, I find it to be helpful so that for everyone to know that what we care about most is that they are getting their work done. And and if they have a dentist appointment for their kid, or they themselves have to go to the doctor, or they need to run errands in advance of something that's happening this weekend, that we actively celebrate that and show that in how we communicate and show up in our conversations, right? Like, and then we model it ourselves, right? So for me, I sometimes like to work out in the afternoon. Like, I find that that's like when the gym is most empty. And so I don't hesitate to put on my calendar gym. And like, my team knows that at 2 p.m., Brian's away from his computer. And so I'm kind of modeling that they know Brian works his butt off. They know that he's contributing a ton to the team. And they also know that he takes personal time every now and then to go to the dentist, get a haircut, have lunch with somebody, whatever it may be. So modeling it is really important. And then how do you communicate with your team to make sure that they feel safe and comfortable doing those kinds of things as well?
Thank you. Thank you for that, Brian. Jenay?
Definitely agree. It reminds me of the leadership book, The Leadership Challenge. Kuzner and
Oh,
Posner takes, um, modeling the way is the first tenet of that. And so I can't agree more with having the model of life-work balance is what my director calls it, and really being transparent as appropriate within a work environment of some of the challenges you may be going through and experiencing, because it helps create empathy as well. And so that's something that I found to be very helpful as a part of modeling the way, sharing empathy and showing it as well.
no.
I'll throw in one more
Yeah.
note here, and that's also modeling when you communicate with your team, right? So let's all think about how we feel when you get an email from somebody who far outranks you or is a supervisor on a Saturday afternoon, right? Like you know that your blood pressure goes up for a second, and you know that you feel like you must check it and you need to respond to it or take a look at it. So now take that and apply it to the rest of your team and recognize that the when of you communicate also matters, the in addition to the what of you communicating. So we're lucky that we also live in a time where all of the tools that we use also have schedule send features. So like that's a sort of super basic tip is schedule it to send at 9 a.m. on Monday, and it doesn't in any way negatively affect your productivity if as a leader you're working on the weekend, but it does free up your team to have clear headspace on their day off.
Yeah. All those points, so critical. Now, friends, as wonderful, candidly, as enlightening as this conversation's been, I think it's actually time for us to wrap up. And to do so, I'd like to turn things back over to these wonderful panelists just to offer their final words of wisdom. Jenay, we'll start with you.
Modern leadership is an art. It's certainly not a science. It's something that takes refinement over time. I truly believe that if you are a people-centered leader, a servant leader, that building a culture of safety, of belonging and authenticity will help to create people who do wish to follow you and to support your mission and your vision. And so I definitely think that as time progresses, that we will see even more of a shift for bringing your whole self to work and really creating a community where there is trust and accountability as well. And that will help to have more successful organizations and teams.
Thank you. Thank you for that so much, Jenay. Brian, to you.
I'll say that good leadership is active. It is not passive. It's something that requires sincere effort. And if folks are on this discussion, then I imagine they intend to put some effort and are currently, working on it. So it's something that is an ongoing, active process. And I'll just underscore the value of building strong relationships with your team.
And I think both of those thoughts that both of y'all shared, I think, are a wonderful note to end upon. So thank you both. Thank you, Jenay. Thank you, Brian, for joining us today, leading us inspirationally through this conversation. And I also want to thank everyone that did attend and your contributions to what was really a remarkable conversation about an important, and it was an inspirational and remarkable conversation about important topics. And it's those conversations that make William & Mary and its tribe, I think, such a wonderful place to learn, to live, and to lead. Thanks again to everyone. We look forward to seeing you soon. And Kelly, I think I turn it over to you now.
Great. Thank you so much, JD, for serving as our moderator today, and to our panelists, Jenay and Brian. We really appreciate you for sharing your knowledge, your stories, and advice with the full William & Mary community this afternoon. And we understand and appreciate the time you took and the effort you placed in preparing your comments and information that you wanted to share with everyone today. It's definitely been a session, as JD said, inspiring team management through authentic connections with situational strategies for leadership across generations. We thank you for providing tangible examples that we can implement in our day-to-day lives and our own career paths. As Michael mentioned in the beginning of the session, we are working to incorporate the NACE career readiness competencies, and you easily hit on the topics of leadership, communication, critical thinking, and teamwork, 4 out of 8 is a pretty good hour spent. And for all of you who attended today, you chose to attend for your own professional growth and development. And so I'd like you to take some time as soon as we get off this call to write down 1 to 2 next steps for yourself. What are you going to do based on what you've learned today? Maybe pick up one of the books that was mentioned, or there was also a podcast shared in the chat by one of the attendees. What are you going to do for yourself? What strategies do you want to implement in your own workplace? So be on the lookout for where you can continue the conversation. And with that, I'm going to turn it over to Alex.
Thanks, Kelly. So thanks everyone for being part of today's session. I encourage you to join tomorrow's sessions. We have Take Ownership of Your Career scheduled for noon Eastern Standard Time, and then Cultivating Organizational Culture at 3 p.m. Eastern Standard Time tomorrow. So your participation in the entire week is greatly appreciated. We have an online networking hour at noon Eastern Standard Time on Friday. And we've learned all collectively so many things from the panel today. So thank you all so much for joining. I'm going to quickly share one other opportunity we have on One Network. So if you have a takeaway that you want to highlight from today's session, maybe it's something that Kelly just mentioned, a book that you're going to take away and read, or something that really resounds with you, go ahead and drop it into our feed for today. We have a post that's pinned at the very top, and you can share if you attended any of the sessions today. You can drop a couple lines in there. So thank you all so much for joining us today. The website is onenetwork.wm.edu. All right, have a wonderful afternoon.
Thanks, everybody.